Welcome, everybody. This is the members only RE Indicator webinar for the 14th of July in 2023. Glad you could join us. We have a few bits and tidbits of information to share with you. And as always, we want to focus on your thoughts, your questions, your ideas, because that's the crux of why we do these webinars, to make sure you're getting what you need out of understanding how the system works and things that you do on your business that I might be able to lend some insight into. So with that, I'm going to show you the agenda for today. We're going to have some headlines. We're going to focus particularly today on what's going on with the Fed, interest rates, inflation, job creation, all of those things kind of stirred together. Show you a couple of interesting charts to focus on that. And then we're going to have our focus of topic today is the market size discussion. And there'll probably be some questions from those of the folks who are here live about that topic, because I want to make sure everybody's comfortable with it. With most things, you'd hope there is a hard and fast rule, but with almost every rule, there is an exception or two or five. So we want to make sure you're not only comfortable with the rule, but the exception as well. And as we go through this session, if there are questions, I very much welcome you raising your hand if you're here live, or putting into the chat panel something you want some more information on, more clarification on. We also can accept in the future. It'll be a lot easier for me because of the way we've changed things here. Working on this for a really long time, but I want to make it so that there's a way that you can email me and I'm able to access it and see in advance that there's a topic or question you want addressed on the webinars. Wish that had been smoother up to this point, but I think by the time we get to August, that'll be sorted out. All right, so let's dive into our topic today. And I'm watching the chat panel and I'm watching for raised hands. So just let me know if there's something you want me to go into in a deeper level or you want to add to it. The first thing I want to show you here today, these are headlines that we're going to review and then go into the subjects that go with them and the charts that go with them. The Wall Street Journal was reporting the other day that inflation has cooled to the slowest pace since 2021. Now, we're going to see some charts in a little bit that kind of dive deeper into that to help us see a little more clearly on that. But the net effect of that, kind of looking forward before we look back in more detail, is that the view on this is that the economists are suggesting, analysts are suggesting, this means that the Feds will probably cool off on their rate increases. We are likely to have one more round, according to their assessment. Most folks that analyze this aspect of things, of markets and how the Fed behaves, are suggesting that there'll probably be one more round of rate increases and then a halt. Now, that is usually a plateau, and they usually stay at a relatively high rate compared to what was previously the lower rates for many months on end. But it does become sort of the light at the end of the tunnel. It would be an indication that there's a feeling that whatever the Fed was trying to accomplish by raising rates as much as they did, that they have slowed the rampant inflation that people had been noting not that long ago of nearly 10%. We were over 9%. So we did not want that to continue. And one tool that we have to make that change is the Fed charging more interest. And the effect for us is that it should make it so that we're not constantly thinking about the cost of borrowing going up and up and up as we do our underwriting. It should stabilize for a while and be relatively easy to have a sort of a benchmark that we work with for months on end as a starting point that we would, of course, check in with any of our debt providers so that we make sure that we're dialed in properly. But on a first run through an underwriting for an analysis on a property, we would have a pretty good sense where that interest rate would be. Now it's been high, the last year plus has been highly volatile. So it'd be nice to kind of calm that aspect of this down and bring some more predictability to things. I thought it would be helpful to look at some charts on this subject. So I added this to the mix here. This was another article that was in the Wall Street Journal on the 13th. Inflation cools, but not quickly enough for the Fed. They certainly don't like the interest rate being much above 2. And the reason why I thought this article was particularly insightful is that And not only did that perspective say that there is another rent increase that's likely, but that it may be the last, it also included this rent increase measure, which is something we are always focused on in our line of work. And as you can see, we had some tepid rent increases on average. We were at, let's just call this 4% for several years going into the dotted line fall off here. We entered the recession that only lasted 2 months because of things in 2020, and rents actually almost went to zero in the rate of increase. And then we had this massive, really unusual, uncharacteristic, dramatic, continuous increase in rents for many, many months. In fact, you can see here, let's just call beginning of 2021 when it started, and the end of 2021 and early 2022 into maybe spring of 2022, well, January, February, March, first quarter 2022, when those rates were increasing, and it was really steep and dramatic. And then we've started to see the increases continue, but at far less of an increase. So instead of going up 10, 12, 15 and more, we're now going up 8, 6, and then finally down here, we're below 5 as an average. Remember, this is sort of a national perspective. A lot of times what can happen is the markets that we're dealing with are detached from those dynamics. This is an average of averages, really. Hundreds of markets are included in this. So this includes markets that are behaving very tepidly or kind of going backwards, as well as markets that are still very robust in their rent increases. We've seen far fewer markets, though, have these 10, 20% increases as of late. Even markets that are considered pretty dynamic and desirable, these rate increases have just cooled off dramatically because it was not sustainable. We love it when rent increases are a part of the picture because it increases the value of a particular property. We don't love it when it keeps making it more and more expensive to buy a property because the seller is holding on for a value increase that they perceive is happening with rent increases. So everything has another side to it. The decline in rent increases kind of brings the market back down to a cooler state. It also maybe brings a little more realistic views from the sellers about what properties are worth. Hope that is helpful to see. Next, I want to show you an article that was in the Wall Street Journal in the weekend edition last week. Wages rise even as job growth eases. It's very interesting that the dynamic that is usually in place, that really of key driver of inflation, if you want to call it that, or cost of living increase, as it can also be referred to, is driven by the fact that people are making more money. So there's more money in people's pockets, and maybe sometimes there's less goods available, but if there's plenty of job openings and employers have to pay more to get somebody to be attracted to a job, then we have inflation. We have wages going up and more money in the economy from that. So then prices go up and it becomes that spiral, which is something I've discussed in a previous webinar. I think we even did that way back early in the cycle of our webinars here. So we started these webinars in 2020. So we're going into our third year now, and we saw what recessions can do with cost of living and inflation. And then what we were seeing in the recession was that once the economy started behaving in a hiring manner, we had lots of job openings, and that continued to exacerbate the problem with inflation. So we would expect that if the job growth is easing, if there are less job openings, that we would expect maybe the employers wouldn't have to pay as much as they had in the past to hire more folks. But they apparently are still seeing higher salaries that are required, or hourly wages that are required to get people to take jobs. Hires step up pay as unemployment slips, leaving Fed officials likely to tighten again. So this is anticipating one more round of increases in the Fed rates. I love this chart because it helps with that dotted line at the bottom here, that we can see this dashed line towards the bottom. the pre-pandemic average, you can see that we've had huge increases over the average before going into 2020. Massive amounts of additional jobs added to the labor force, which is really a stunning amount of additional jobs. And as we start to slow down here, if you do a trend line, we are definitely slowing down. We occasionally have a peak up here, a little bit of a peak here, but the trend line is definitely lower. And the June numbers, 200,000. So 200,000 is about normal for a monthly job gain. So if we're above that, it puts pressure on the market to potentially feel that the economy is overheated in the way that the Fed would characterize it. So that helps us sort of suggest that it helps us see that maybe things are finally getting back to something more of a normal pace for these measures. Although I don't think we're going to ever have the quote unquote normal we had in 2019. I think that world is definitely altered. All right, so this is the last chart and set of ideas that I want to share with you today in this topic. I want to make sure I can see everything here. Fresh signs of easing prices. So inflation was pretty robust. Inflation is closer to normal levels. We want our target, interestingly, just like our target for growth of markets, 2% or more for 2 years or more, the magic number for inflation is also 2%. If our inflation is above 2%, it tends to create these negative effects in the economy. 2% is a robust, well-performing, well-functioning economy, and everybody seems to be focused on that. Obviously, you could go find contrary points of view, and I respect that, absolutely, but that's the general sense of where people are at as economists and where the Fed is at. So we have an expectation that the Fed would want to see inflation be a lot closer to 2 consistently in order for them to feel like they can really stop with the rate increases and maybe begin to envision some reductions. I don't suspect there'll be reductions for quite a while, but stability would be nice. About a year ago, we saw inflation being quite dramatic, and it caused a lot of stir. This chart shows that this spike that's at the end of the chart on the far right-hand side, I think I can do my annotate on this without going too far off the rails here. This, oops, nope, that's not working there. Let's try this. Not select, spotlight. I think I can do a spotlight on this. This spike over here is the one that we've been freaking out about, so to speak, recently. But as you can see, there have been many times in the past where we've been much higher or somewhat spiky. And it's these spikes that tend to be right before or during a recession. You'll notice this is a very long time window here. Some of you might recall the stagflation days of the 70s. We had inflation at one point was in the mid-teens. It was not a good time to try to borrow money. Interest rates for mortgages were the high teens and low 20s. So this was a tough time to be an investor. But we do see that we were getting towards that sort of outsized inflationary pace, and that's why the Feds just kept at it with their rate increases. Now, if I go to, I think I'm allowed to do this. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. I think I have to turn my arrow off, and then I can go to my PowerPoint. Nope, it's not letting me go to the PowerPoint. Sorry, everybody. Let's try this. There we are. If we zoom in on that last spike in the chart, we can see actually that when we went into the recession here, and let me put my draw on right now. When we went into the recession here, and it was this period, this gray period is recession, and the numbers for inflation went way up. And that interestingly coincided with unemployment. Now, we hired a whole bunch of people as we came out of the recession, and we now have very almost completely consistent here. This line it's almost a straight line. Unemployment has been verging on or reaching all-time lows from month to month. We've had a couple of months where we had record lows, very low unemployment. And low unemployment would suggest that when employers want to add jobs, they're going to have trouble finding employees, so they have to increase their wages. And if they increase their wages, they're going to drive inflation. So unemployment is robust in terms of suggesting a healthy economy, but it's also in a position where we might be a bit concerned that we are potentially setting ourselves up for a continuing cycle of inflation. So nobody's really certain at this point, but I think there's a general consensus that we could be finally entering a period of stability, predictability, where we've had such huge, wild fluctuations on these economic measures since early 2020 when we began the recession. If you remember, I've said this a number of times. I'll repeat it here just in case this is the first webinar that you've had a chance to join or haven't heard this in a long time. I just want to remind everybody that the pandemic shutdowns occurred in March, but economists see that we went into a recessionary phase in February, and we actually were only in that recession for February and March. And because of the shutdown, we actually came out of the recession very rapidly because there were huge amounts of money dumped into the economy very rapidly. So that's a very interesting dynamic. We've never had such a short recession in my lifetime. I'm going to check in here before I head out to the next section here, which is our topic of the day. I want to see if there's anybody has any questions or want to raise their hand and add their voice to our conversation about the economic trends. While I do that, I'll just summarize again. I believe that by the time we get to the fall, we will start to feel a lot of confidence of a relatively calm period. There's still an outside chance that we will have a soft landing of a recession, or we will have an actual recession. Nothing's off the table, but the measures are showing us that maybe we will even avoid anything that could be characterized as a true recession this go round. So there you have it. All right, with that, I'd like to move on to our next topic, which is about market size and how important that subject is in terms of understanding what investment you might be getting involved with. So I'm going to make sure I check in on those chat panels when I complete this conversation. So if you do have some thoughts or questions or ideas, I will be sharing with you some of these thoughts of this topic, and then making sure that you're all clear on things before I go to the next slide. So I'm going to need to clear this screen up. Where is that annotate thing? Annotate, there's a clear, there we go. Clear all drawings. If you're an RE indicator and you're in the drop down for emerging markets, and most importantly, if you are using the data point here for the most recent year, the most recent full year, as I've marked here in the notes, not quarterly data, your pop-ups for each of the markets are fully populated. We only reveal the market name in all of the other years and all of the quarters, so that we can consolidate our efficiency of delivering information to you. So if you go to the drop-down menu and go into emerging markets and choose right now, the most current full year of data is naturally for 2022. All data is historical, and that we are using right now. We use historical data to see where things have been, to kind of get a sense of where things might be going. If we choose 2022 and then click on a particular market, we're going to get this pop-up. And that means that if I go over here, I got to go back to PowerPoint. I got to stop the share. I wish that was a little easier to do this. Let's clear all drawings, and then let's get out of annotate. And let's go to our next page. Here we are. We're back inside the system when we've got it sort of frozen here on the idea of a market size. I happen to randomly click on a particular market. This is not an endorsement or suggestion of a focus on a particular market. It happened to have been Colorado Springs, Colorado. The population there in 2020, it was 753,000. And by the way, we do have a whole process we'd hope to get done in the spring, but we're still working on to refresh all of this data for you. rest assured that population counts and population sizes and ranks and all of the data that goes with this in this chart will not change very dramatically when we do this refresh of data. It'll be wonderful to have it, but we're really close to the ballpark with what you have here now. So don't worry too much that we're looking at 2020 numbers here. There's a whole lot of stuff about the way census data works, et cetera, where we wanted to wait in order for us to get you the data that was useful, and then we will update these once a year again. All right, so what we have here is a market size category that's been labeled in this case as tertiary. So market size category tertiary. So let's see if I can do a drawing on this. This tertiary, there you are. And the tertiary is not the smallest, but the second smallest grouping that we use. The sizing of markets is relatively subjective. So unlike the MSAs, which are defined by OMB, Office of Management and Budget, to be very specific geographies that everyone agrees to, there is no standard across the board, universally used definition of primary, secondary, and tertiary. In fact, those phrases are used in two very different geographic components. One is what we're talking about today, which is comparing markets to each other. So if you have a list of, let's say, 388 MSAs, which there are 388, plus there's divisions and submarkets, but if there's 388 MSAs, how do they compare to each other? So let's rank them from most populated to least populated. The size categorizations are population driven. So you could probably, in your mind right now, without having any more knowledge, know what the primary markets are likely to be. You could make some guesses and you'd probably be right. And the first 4 or 5 of them are pretty easy. And then from there, it's like, well, when does it start becoming secondary? And then when does secondary become tertiary? And that is actually a lot of the subjectivity, as well as another nuance that I want to share with you. So we're using a formula that kind of stirs together the best of all that are out there. I've read a number of different ways that people decide to categorize these markets. They are not consistent. I wanted to try to split the difference and go for something that was very simplistic and compatible largely with what everybody else is using. So we have basically put the very large markets, let's say the New Yorks, the LAs, the San Franciscos, the Miamis, in the category of primary. And then we're going to go into the secondaries. So like the Charlottes and the Columbuses and the Denvers are going to be secondary. So they're smaller than the primaries, but they're really quite sizable. Then we go into tertiaries. And that's pretty much where I would draw the line. I would really be uncomfortable myself trying to get involved with markets that are referred to as quaternary. And the quaternaries are under 200,000 in population size. So the tertiaries are essentially between 200,000 and don't write this down, but let's just say 1 million to be simplistic on this. And that size is particularly appealing for what we do. Sometimes it's really hard to get into the primary markets because they're so well known. The cap rates tend to be low universally. There's a lot of competition. So where we can oftentimes find a lot better opportunities are in secondary and even tertiary markets. We want to be careful that the tertiary markets aren't too removed and too isolated. We prefer to work on some of the larger tertiaries. We also prefer to work on tertiaries that are melded in geographically conveniently approximate to other fairly good sized tertiaries or secondaries even. So for example, Colorado Springs by itself as an MSA is a tertiary, but it's near Denver as a secondary. It's near Fort Greeley. It's got Boulder. It's got a lot going on right nearby. So we want to use this not as the single point. Okay, let's underscore that phrase again. Some of you can actually say it with me as I say it out loud. No one piece of data is all we need to know. We use the idea of the market size in context with what other markets are nearby and how big they are to help us get a sense of whether or not perhaps we would want to be very interested or not. So there are mostly good opportunities in tertiary markets at the larger end of things, or even on the smaller end if they're near other markets that create like a clump or collective of opportunity. You want to be careful not to get involved with the tertiary markets that are too remote from other markets and don't have a lot of economic dynamism going on in them. There is a way to use primary, secondary, tertiary to describe what's going on inside a very large metropolitan area. So in the Washington, D.C. area, downtown Washington and Arlington and Alexandria are all close in. That would be referred to as the primary market. And then you get out into the suburbs, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Fairfax County. You could make a sort of a sense that maybe they're secondary. And then you go further out and you get into Loudoun County and Prince William County and Frederick County and Maryland. You just get farther and farther removed from the core of the metropolitan area. So primary, secondary, tertiary is also used as a collective of ideas to compare these submarkets within a major metro to each other inside that one metro. The core of the conversation today is how we manage to get a sense of what's going on with the market from this market to market comparison. We will have a separate discussion on a future webinar about primary, secondary, tertiary inside a singular MSA to understand what goes on with that. So our tertiary market of Colorado Springs, let's get down to the answer here. If I saw Colorado Springs as a market, would I be interested? And no one piece of data all by itself is going to tell me, but I found out it's a tertiary, but it's not a 200,000 tertiary, it's a 753,000 tertiary. So I'm getting interested, and then I want to see what might be near it. I recognize that not everybody's memorized the whole country and memorized what MSAs are near each other. I know I haven't memorized every one of them. I might have a general sense or a pretty good sense about what's going on here and there, but I would want to do a little bit of checking. So let's go over to the RE indicator system in order to do that. And I'm going to look in the chat panel now and either have somebody raise their hand and add their voice, or type in the chat itself and give me a market or two that you would like to have looked up live in the system to talk about the size of it and how it relates to how we do our analysis and how we figure out what market we may want to be in. So this is where it was in the static PowerPoint that we were using. I see, Marie, you've popped in a name here. Thank you. We will talk that one up right away. And if there are others, we'll put a couple in there. We'll show you how to find information and discuss how to get excited or not excited about a particular market. So here's Colorado Springs. Let's get rid of this. In the upper right, I'm going to get rid of this X. And I'm going to get a little bit closer on this part of the country, because if you were interested in this part of the country, you probably would have zoomed in a fair bit more than you have on that view that I was just showing you. For those of you who have very trained eyes, you might already see these very thin white lines that are separating the individual MSAs from each other. As we get closer on the map, they become a little more obvious. But anytime you have the data set to the current full year of data, the most recent full year of data, you can see it's a little more obvious between the grays, between the Cheyenne and the Greeley. If I click on Greeley, it's going to show me the size for Greeley. And Greeley by itself is 333,000, and it's a tertiary. So not all tertiaries are the same, but what they are really as a collective are usually last in, first out. So when a recession is about to come in, they are oftentimes the markets that struggle the most. And they are often the last to actually gain traction when we go through a recovery phase. That has been the tradition for decades. So if we go through these ups and downs in the markets, some of you might remember the recession in the 80s, we had a recession in the 90s, we had a recession in the early aughts, we had a recession in the late aughts. We've done this before and before and before. Those traditions may be interrupted by our changing taste in where we want to live because of what happened in 2020. We seem to be moving towards more modestly sized metros. We've not given up on the downtowns. We've not given up on big MSAs. Office buildings are struggling, retail is struggling, but they're still vibrant and vital cities, and they will continue to rebound and become something slightly different because these jobs have in some part moved to these tertiary markets. I see several other markets been popped in the chat, so thank you for those. So if I were to see, if I had clicked on, maybe I was over here in Colorado Springs, I may have been interested in this market. And it's like, well, if I'm going to bother going to a market that's tertiary, I'm going to want something more than just that market by itself, usually because they tend to not have a whole lot of inventory in them. So by going to a market like Colorado Springs, I know that I can go to Denver, which, as you can see, is a secondary. It's got 2.9 million. I believe the measure is 3 million for the cutoff between secondary and primary. It doesn't matter anymore in my head. That number doesn't matter anymore. But this is an indication that we've got a very, very large secondary. We've also got Boulder, which is a tertiary at 360 right nearby. We've got another 330 here. So if you start adding up all of these markets that are right near each other, I would not include Cheyenne in this construct here. It's a different state, and for a whole lot of reasons, it's not as dynamically interconnected with these other markets in Colorado. I would say it would be worthwhile going to that tertiary market of Colorado Springs. Now we need to get to the dynamics of an individual MSA. If I were to put effort into this area, I would definitely be looking in Denver. I would have less hope for finding great value in Colorado Springs. Cap rates are artificially low because of the large Air Force facility that's there. It's not as robustly growing as Denver or Boulder, or even actually interesting Fort Collins. Greeley's doing quite well. So I would say the least growth one is Pueblo. It is bouncing back from its depth. That's why we have this light green here. It's bouncing back from its challenges of 2020. But this would be an indication to me that if I were to go into this market, there'd probably be markets right nearby that broker or other brokers that you're networking with would have additional inventory that would be worth me spending some time going after that market. So let's go over here to Grand Junction while we're here. You can see there's nothing around Grand Junction. There are no other grays or light greens or dark greens anywhere near Grand Junction. So if I click on Grand Junction and I notice that, oh, not only is it isolated, but it's actually a quaternary. Its population is under 200,000. So if I did not live in Grand Junction, I would be very disinclined to get excited about trying to do business in that particular market for what we do. It's just too hard. It's too hard to get there, too little inventory, et cetera. Hopefully that is getting you down the road to what these primary, secondary, tertiaries can help us with. No one piece of data is good enough. Not all primaries are great. Not all tertiaries are no-go. They tend to be a little bit more iffy, and they're a little bit more case by case. That's why I'm showing you this sort of clumping that can suggest it's more favorable. The other thing that can be a dynamic that's going on would be what you know from the broker and from your research online, in the Business Journal, the Crain's Business, the BizNow, all these other information sources, that there's something dynamic in that market that's changing the pace of things and changing the direction of things. All right, so let me go to some markets here that others have picked up and asked about on this. One of them is Tucson. So we're popping over here to Arizona. Again, look for those very, very thin white lines. And you can see if I actually change this to Q4, no, let's try 2020. I expected there to be no bright green. I can see that this particular market here has a clear definition marking it off. I'm more used to looking for those light green lines because I do it all the time. But I wanted to show you in case you get stuck and can't really see where markets begin and end, that's a way to do it. So if I click on this and I'm not in the right year, the most recent full year of data, I'm just going to get the name of the market. So we know we're in Tucson. Excellent. Now what I'm going to do is change that data over to the most recent full year of data. And now when I click on it, I get my full chart. Tucson is indeed a tertiary market. It is not rapidly growing. It's not known for rapid growth the way that we've seen rapid growth occurring in neighboring Phoenix. But by being a tertiary that's just about at 1 million, that's pretty darn robust. And it's so close to Phoenix that if you look at the dynamics of what's being drawn into that particular um, area, if you see the types of businesses that are arriving and the sectors that they are in, while the numbers aren't huge like they are in Phoenix, they're desirable and favorable enough that that would be a market that, even though it's labeled tertiary, we would potentially be very attracted to it because of that proximity to another market of its even more dynamic and more robust sizing. And I think Phoenix is going to come in here. It's a primary. We're over 5 million in the metro. So that is a really great market to be in. I really like that. A little less competitive than Phoenix, less inventory. Again, there's always a flip side. Something that makes something good could also make it more challenging. Desirable, but therefore competitive. So that's why relationships with brokers and property managers are all the difference in the world to find the good deals. There's competition in the better markets. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look there. If you go to markets where there's no competition, my challenge to you would be, how do you expect there to be enough growth to perform increases in rents, value adds, and create the value for your investors when you go to sell? If they're not looking now, if there's not many people looking there now to buy, then there may not be very many looking there in the future. So that's where I get a challenge to you to say, okay, I've gone somewhere where there's no competition. I found a really good deal. It's got numbers on the spreadsheet. My underwriting shows numbers. I just want to caution you, will it be able to perform? If it can cash flow, you can manage it well, you get good property managers on it, then by all means, it should be taken very seriously. But you may not get the huge, robust gains unless it's a really good deal with value add that comes particularly from poor management, just a total lack of keeping rents up with the market, and a relatively easy lift potentially for obtaining those true market rates of rent. The challenge would be that maybe that CapEx to do that is pricing you out of that deal. Everything is deal specific. All right, next one on the list is Louisville. Let me show you another functionality in the system so that make sure everybody is familiar with this and how this works, especially for the new people. If I open up the panel and type in L-O-U, oops, it's not letting me do that, L-O-U, Louisville comes up as an opportunity. We're going to click on Louisville, and you notice when you do that, and the reason why I wanted to do this is it zooms way in on tight on the center of the market. These are interesting so far. Colorado Springs, Tucson, Louisville, these are all markets I've physically been in the last year. Very, very, very fortunate to get to travel this country so extensively. So the Louisville market is an interesting one because I think you're going to be finding fairly artificially low cap rates. It's not growing quite as rapidly, but it also isn't losing. It's not going backwards. For those who might be looking in that particular market, there is some buzz about some growth, particularly in the good sectors of battery and electric vehicle production. Also down this way in Elizabethtown, we have the same thing. So this sort of corridor in here could benefit from the investments Ford is making, but I wouldn't expect it to be a complete home run. It's really hard to get a home run in a market like Louisville, unless you find distressed property, distressed seller, below market rents, not too heavy a lift on CapEx, very well located in the submarket, great neighborhood. I mean, it's just, there's a lot more that is needing to come in. The stars need to get into alignment, so to speak, where it's when you have markets like, let's just pick on Dallas Fort Worth as I want everybody to just all of a sudden say they only can do deals in Dallas Fort Worth. But I think a lot of people know for much of Dallas Fort Worth, not everything, but a lot of Dallas Fort Worth, it's a lot more lenient because it's growing so well that all boats are being lifted by that tide. Most boats are being lifted by that tide. So it's a little more, there's a term that we use for this. It's a little more gentle. It's a little less stringent. It's a little more generous in its ability to create. You've got more leeway to create opportunity in the more robust markets. Louisville, not as much. I do like that it's on the radar again for manufacturing, especially high-end manufacturing. UPS is there. There's some stability there, some super stability there. So I like that quite a bit. If I lived in Kentucky, if I lived in Southern Ohio, this would be a place I would be focused on. if I lived maybe in, let's say, Albany, New York, and I didn't want to compete head to head with everybody down in Dallas, Fort Worth, maybe I'd be looking around in Louisville, maybe. There are other markets that might have a little more opportunity, a little more growth, but it can be an example of a market that by its size is a tertiary of, but 1.25 million, that's pretty good size, but it's not in the throes of a huge sprawling metropolis the way that Colorado Springs is part of the whole Denver metroplex. So I would be cautiously optimistic for a Louisville. Interestingly, the capital, Frankfurt, is not even MSA. It's another MSA that's micropolitan statistical area. Lexington nearby, it's not a very long drive between the two, but there's not a lot of dynamism between the two. That's actually how they draw lines between MSAs, as they say. They're basically commuter sheds. Where do commuters go to? What's their center point for jobs? I hope that's helpful on Louisville. It's a charming city. Lexington's got its charms too. And I really quite liked downtown Elizabethtown because I grew up in somewhat of a smaller town outside of a very big city. And so I was delighted to have discovered Elizabethtown. We got another one. We have in this list here, Winter Haven, Lakeland, and I think you're mentioning probably a bigger metro because it's a longer list. Let me move these panels around. Tampa, yeah. So let me show you how this works. Let's just put in Winter Haven. It is a city in Florida. And so we want to find Winter Haven. Okay, I'm not clicking on the right thing. Thank you for your patience, everyone. And so I'm going to type in Florida, right? Winter Haven, Florida. Let me try that again. Winter, there it is, Haven. It's 2 words. I knew I did that wrong. So if I click on Winter Haven, Florida, this is a perfect example of how to make sure you're understanding how the maps work. Some of the stuff is our indicator specific, like the shades on the map and why some markets are the way they are. But where things are, that's what other people decided before I could ever get my hands on doing anything to help you as our indicator chief technology officer. So Winter Haven, as you can see in this particular market, if we click right near Winter Haven, we can see that Winter Haven is part of a larger metropolitan statistical area than just Winter Haven. It is lumped into the Lakeland-Winter Haven, Florida MSA. It's a place for me to mention to you all that if a market is listed as a growth market, that doesn't mean the whole market is growing at the same rate. Some parts are growing much more robustly and other parts might actually be going backwards. So if it says Lakeland, Winter Haven, that doesn't mean you're going to have the same success in Lakeland that you're going to have in Winter Haven. And even inside of the area that's more referred to as Lakeland, there are pockets that are better and not as high growth. Same with Winter Haven. So generally speaking, when you look at Winter Haven and Lakeland, this is one of the best markets in the country for quite some time. It's one of the few markets that had notable and desirable growth in 2022. Very few markets are dark green, which is more than 2 years of growth. The light green ones are just 2 years. So they're kind of potentially flash in the pans. They've reached emerging market status, but they may not last very long. We don't know yet. But we have markets like Lakeland. I usually refer to Lakeland, Winter Haven as just Lakeland by itself for simplicity purposes. And the Villages, great market for growth, but maybe not for our business. That's a whole nother subject. We could have an hour-long conversation about the Villages by itself. Not very big. So if we click on Winter Haven, we can see it's a tertiary, but it's 750,000 people. And it's right next to Orlando, which is a secondary at 2.6 million. And it's right next to Tampa, St. Pete, et cetera, as a secondary of 3.2 million. So absolutely, what you're seeing is a lot of pressure from the huge growth that's been going on literally for decades in Tampa and Orlando is just converging at this center point that is now Lakeland and Winter Haven. So I've actually been here as well on my travels. Now, in the question that was typed in is Winter Haven, Lakeland, Tampa. And it's interesting because when we are given opportunities by our brokers, if you, let's say you found a broker in Tampa, they might say, hey, would you be interested in something over in Lakeland or over in Winter Haven? And the answer should almost always be, no matter what, yes, because it gives you a chance to get something to underwrite. It gives you a chance to develop the relationship, to see what they have to offer, to get clarity on how the market's behaving or the neighboring markets are behaving. So if they ask if you're interested in, your answer is yes, I'll take a look at that. And you should go on the map and look at it. You should go and underwrite it. You should do the driving of the market when we are inside the micro neighborhoods section here, down here, up at the top, sorry. Inside the micro neighborhoods, you should drive the neighborhood with the tool in the lower right where you do the Google Street View. Absolutely. But as a tertiary market, you would think, oh gosh, maybe it's too small. But this would be a perfect example of tertiary market I would love to see make an opportunity for you. So be careful with that one, in that you will potentially be seeing some insurance increases in pretty much all of Florida, maybe less so in Orlando and Lakeland. You go to the south, there's a market that nobody should be in. This is a quaternary market, 100K in population, Sebring. It's not a good market. So as I was describing earlier, there's sort of like a front range of Denver and all of the markets nearby, and most of them are pretty desirable. But once you get just far enough away, all the way down to Pueblo and all the way up to Cheyenne, we don't usually have the same ripple effect. You don't expect it to be a complete coverage. And then we have the same phenomenon in this Sebring. It's just too far away to match in. The interstate doesn't go through it, and so many other reasons. It's not a place to be. So I'm going to go back to my chat here and see if there's any question. So I see, does this mean not to buy in this area? So clearly we want to clarify what does what mean not to buy in this area. So if you could clarify your question on that. Is there a market population percent growth or ranking that we should consider to say that it is favorable market to pay attention to? Yes. You really want to be in markets that are in emerging status and wherever possible, where the population growth is also around 2% or more. This population growth that you see here in Lakeland is not reflective of some really rapid growth that's occurred since this data was taken. But you can see in here, for example, that many of the markets, when you look at the 2020 data, that there really was very tepid growth in almost all metros. So our challenge is the numbers we used to use for decades don't make a whole lot of sense because we have this sort of reshuffling as a result of the pandemic. We want to see population growth as close to 2% as possible, as well as being flagged an emerging market. But it is pretty much a case-by-case basis and a year-by-year basis. So I, for example, think Tampa is a pretty good and solid market, and you can see the population growth was not even 0.5%, not even 0.25% in 2020. Well, 2020 wasn't a year where we were doing a whole lot of moving. So we wouldn't use any one year like that to help us with that. That's why we're kind of waiting for things to shuffle out and not update data in 2021. We were waiting to have enough quality data from 2022 to do these updates to see if we can get you some population growth numbers that would be useful. We'd normally be looking for numbers in the at least 1 to 1.5% range and higher, along with an emerging market. I hope that answers that question. Seems to be a good market. So this question is from Marie. Seems to be a good market. Well, if you're referring to Lakeland, Winter Haven, absolutely. It's a tougher market to get into because the inventory is not particularly robust. Excuse me, need to take a little sip there. And you do have a fair amount of competition because it's well known enough to be growing. But if you are Central Floridian or you're invested in that overall corridor and have good activity in there, you've got good brokers, you've got great property managers, by all means, it would be one of my favorite markets. I'm not biased that one of my best friends, going all the way back to first grade, happens to call Lakeland home now, but I'm trying to just use data to make that determination. But it is true that it is statistically quite strong. Let's see. If the area is green, do we buy in that area? Oh, everybody, I hope everybody wants the yes, no, and the simple. And I really wish everything were quite that simple. It is not a green light to buy. It is a symbol, as you can see in the legend in the lower left, that it means it's a market that's had 3 or more years of growth in the emerging market classification of 2+% over 2 years or more. So if it's a light green, it's just finally had that second year. If it's a dark green, it's in the 3rd year or the 4th year or the 5th year. So you can go through the dynamics here. You could go, for example, to 2016 and see where it was. Yes, that market was green. 2017, it was green. 2018, it was green. So you can build a pattern of behavior and see whether or not there's a longevity to this growth. And that would be both good and bad. The good part is it's growing. The bad part is maybe the availability of opportunities are not as robust as you'd like. A market of this size, just by itself, when we go back to 2022 and we get the population number on this, we can see that this market, get this back to 2022, this market has 750,000 people. So there are some multifamilies, but not to the same volume you're going to find in Tampa and St. Pete and Orlando. It would be a very good market to be in. So if it's green by itself, it's not a complete winner. If you'll indulge me in a moment here, we can go up to a market that, well, I guess Ocean City has finally cooled off again. We could go here, for example, a lovely, wonderful quaternary market, already a warning sign, green, but it's Idaho Falls and it's near nothing. So if you don't live in Idaho, you shouldn't be there. Same thing here. And we look at this market, really tough to get into Provo, Orem if you don't live there. It is a tertiary by itself, but it's got Salt Lake right near it. And it's really hard to do business there if you don't live locally. You really can't pounce on the deal. Same with St. George down here in the lower left corner of the state. Also a smaller quaternary market, just almost 200,000 right now, but not near enough, not close enough to Vegas to be a spillover, and really not much inventory. So just by being green, you can't say it's great. Dark green is not necessarily great. This, what people are telling me they see as yellow is meant to be a light green. But it's just green is not enough. It's a help. And much more importantly is going through the market animation in the lower left above the legend and watching how things change over time. I'm going to go ahead and do that now for us here while we're looking at Florida. So it's going to reset to 1994 and we can just watch that market. So it kind of cooled off in 95, Lakeland in particular, 96. It actually wasn't a terrific market in the 90s. It's really in the last 10 years, 7 years that it's really caught on as quite robust. See there, cooled off again in 99 after having 2 good years in a row. Nearly everything cooled off in 2020, certainly 2001 and 2002. There's nothing really going on in Central Florida. And then we start to do an economic recovery. We see Southwest Florida starting to bounce back, and then much of Florida starts to bounce back. So you get into 04, 05, 06. So you can see that this animation can help you get a better sense of a pulse of a market and not have data all by itself tell you everything. That's just our recession in 2008. We had the crash. The housing crash was not kind to Florida. The mortgage-backed securities crash was not kind to Florida. It took years to recover from that fiasco. And you can see the big metros to the south and southwest were first on board. So use that animation tool in the lower left or use year-by-year pickings from this drop-down menu to help you go through the history. And I usually go through all 30 years, we're almost at 3 decades, and help that inform me, have that help me inform me. What about the ranking that I see listed? Do you consider that as well? I only do ranking as a way to help people get a sense of, why might it be considered small, medium, or large? So for example, I tell people to stay away from Sebring, and you'll notice that out of all 444 markets that we were tracking at that time, we've actually kind of cleaned up some of the markets. We're not using quite as many submarkets right now to do our analysis so that the processing can be a lot faster for you. We can go to, that's was partly what enabled us to go to a quarterly analysis. We can see that this particular market here, Sebring, let me click on that again. It is ranked at number 353 out of 444 markets. So it's very small. It's a way for you to get a sense of where it is overall in the whole country. It's 35 out of 40. It's way towards the bottom of the list in size. So that, in addition to it being quaternary, in addition to it being far away from other major metros that are robust and growing, would mean that it's altogether probably not worth going there. So it's used to help you compare things. Let's look at Savannah. How does Savannah rank? So Savannah ranks 136. So if there are 400 markets for simplicity purposes, it's just outside of the top 25%. It's not tiny. It's not even middling. It's toward the upper range. It's certainly greater than 50% of all markets. So that is a way for you to kind of characterize the market. And it's interesting that you can share that kind of a number with your prospective investors to let them know that you are trying to get a full sense of where things match up with each other and why you're choosing that market over others. Okay, I hope that helps, Delroy. I hope that's what you were looking for. I do consider it in the sense that it gives me some characterizations, but much more important to me is the overall size, the size category, its proximity to other markets of similar or bigger size, and its reputation, if that has been established by the pattern of emerging market or not emerging market. Those are all far more important. When you want to hear the phrase top 20 market, you now have a resource that you could help you if you go through them one by one. You could say, well, where's Chicago, where's Philadelphia, where's Houston, where's Dallas? You could figure out what the top 20 are by doing that as well. But it's a way, because a lot of people, there are some investors that say they only want their money in the top 50 markets. And this is a way for you to have that piece of information at your fingertips as well. Hope that helps. Wow, my goodness. We're not quite done yet. We still have a few more minutes, so I'll gladly entertain a hand that's raised to add your voice or a chat question. But I want to say, my goodness, we had quite a number of questions today, and it really drove this conversation very favorably. And I want to thank you all for those questions. Really, that's why we do this. I knew that the tool would be really useful for a lot of people, but I also knew that a lot of people may not have the same level of familiarity and understanding of geographic matters, of economic matters, market matters, neighborhood matters. And I wanted to make sure you had access to not just the data, but what's underneath it. And I'll use that as a moment to remind everyone that whenever possible, we keep this button here that's got a beta button on it right now. Click here to schedule a quick strategy call with Scott. That would be me. If you click this button, you will open up a new browser window. So I'm going to do a stop share because I didn't do a share screen. I'm doing a share again. I'll share the desktop now. Let's see. There we are. You'll see it'll pull up a calendar, and you just pick a date and a time, and we'll grab a Zoom call together and talk about your specific market or your situation that you don't want discussed or can't wait for the next webinar. So I'm going to do a stop share. I'm going to try to keep that as active as I can. I have a huge amount of travel coming up, a little bit in early August, a whole lot late August and early September. So it may not be quite as easy to grab a hold of me as I wish it were to be true, but I'm juggling competition for my energies and attention. So try to grab those slots whenever you see them and it can work for you. I love getting a chance to talk with everybody individually. So I'm going to do a share screen one more time to go back to our PowerPoint to wrap up here. And we have nothing changed from the last webinar regarding the intention to bring out to you our August release. We're still pushing really hard to get you the version 4.0 in August. I'm trying my darndest to make that happen for you. It's the same set of things that we're working on. Nothing's changed there, but I have revised the schedule. We will meet as planned previously July 28th, and we're going to meet on August 11th. Due to some of that schedule I was just alluding to, there's a long window of time where A, I'm on the road, and B, some people are also taking time off for the Labor Day, and some of you are going to be going to, I hope many of you are going to Ultimate Partnering in San Diego in early September. So I've got a chunk of time in there that's not possible for me to run these webinars because I will be on the road and preparing for events. So that's the schedule we can do for now. It will be September 15th when we would have our first session in September. So we have one coming up in just 2 weeks. I try to make it as easy as possible in the summertime to get a hold of me. And I suspect that as we go into the rest of September and all of October, I'll have a lot of availability for both one-on-one sessions on that little button I just showed you for quick strategy sessions, as well as our routine for the webinars. Okay, so I'm going to check in on the chat panel and the participants panel to see if anybody's got any questions or want to talk. One last time here, we're coming up at the end of our normal time. And I've got to say, I've really enjoyed this. This is so much fun for me to hear what you're all working on, what you're thinking about, what you need to know about. And I look forward to seeing all of you at the next webinar and hopefully in person in San Diego in just a couple of weeks. I guess we're about less than 2 months out now. So super excited about that. It is the best event of the year. I love it. Hope you all can get a chance to be there. If you've never been before, you should go. I'm referring, by the way, for those who may not make the natural connection, to the RE Mentor Ultimate Partnering event in San Diego. I've not missed a one since they started this series, since they've had the series while I've been a part of RE Mentor, which is now 10 years. I've never missed one of the events. It's my favorite event of the year. They're all great, but that one in particular is my favorite. So please make an effort to be there. I'm not getting any endorsement kickback to promote that to you. I just know how valuable it's been to me and other people that I've met there, and I've heard stories of how valuable it's been. So I look forward to seeing you there. So keep charged up, keep going, and I'll be back here again in 2 weeks to answer more questions. And we'll probably take a deep dive into primary, secondary, tertiary for what's going on in a metro area, and stay focused on one metro and pull it apart into pieces. All right, for now, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much again, very much. Have a great summer weekend. Bye-bye, everybody. You're welcome, Teresa. Thank you.